Well, hello, hello. Welcome back. Impeccable timing, as always. I applaud you. Well, since you're here, we may as well read another chapter of our current book. Now, as I'm sure you are well aware, we are up to chapter 12 of The Land of Stories, The Wishing Spell, and chapter 12 is called The Fairy Kingdom. Alex and Connor emerged from underground between a tree and a big rock. They were covered in dirt and cobwebs and were breathing hard and sweating profusely. It had been so stuffy in the tunnel. "We made it," Alex said. "We're at the surface." "I never thought I'd be so happy to see the sun in the sky," Connor said. It was sometime around noon, and the twins had found themselves in a pleasant grassy field next to a perfectly groomed path. "Is that the path we should have taken after the Red Riding Hood Kingdom?" Connor asked. "Yep," Alex said, looking down at the map. "But think of all the fun we would have missed out on." They shared a laugh. The twins brushed themselves off and headed down the path. They felt very safe in this place. All the trees and fields were perfectly manicured and inviting. Then again, anything would have seemed inviting after narrowly escaping a lifetime of slavery for trolls and goblins. "Are we positive that we're in the Fairy Kingdom?" Connor said, looking around. "I'd say it's very possible," Alex said, but she wasn't looking down at the map. "How do you figure?" Connor asked her. "Well, that's an indication," Alex said and pointed. Gazing around a perfect little stream ahead of them, to their amazement, was a herd of unicorns. They were beautiful, white with silver horns, silver hooves, and silver manes. Connor's forehead wrinkled and his mouth dropped open. "Oh, geez," he said. "That is the most obnoxious thing I have ever seen in my life." "I want to pet one," Alex said and ran toward them. "Alex, be careful," Connor said. "They could have rabies." "Unicorns don't have rabies, Connor," Alex said. "You don't know where those horns have been," Connor called out. Alex walked up to the herd, slowing her pace so she wouldn't spook them. They were so majestic and graceful, she just had to stop and admire them for a moment. One saw her and walked over. Any sane person would have been scared by a wild animal approaching them, but Alex wasn't. For whatever reason, she knew the unicorn wasn't going to harm her. It lowered its head and she petted its face. Connor walked up and stood just beside her. All the other unicorns slowly surrounded them. "Alex," Connor said, "this is making me incredibly nervous." The unicorns formed a perfect circle around the twins and bowed to them. Alex smiled from ear to ear. Connor raised a suspicious eyebrow. "This is trippy," he said. "Maybe they're welcoming us into their kingdom," Alex said. The unicorns stood still as if frozen and didn't show any sign of moving. Connor grabbed Alex's hand and they left the circle and rejoined the path. The stream traveled beside the path just as the twins traveled down it. "Is it just me, or is that water sparkling?" Connor asked. He was right. The further they walked along the stream, the more it appeared to glow and shimmer. "That must mean we're getting close," Alex said happily. "That's Thumbelina Stream. It should take us straight into the Fairy Kingdom." "Well, I say we grab a hold of the first fairy we find and call her names like oversized insect or fish bait until she cries," Connor said. "That's how we'll get the fairy tears." "No, we should come up with a really sad story to tell," Alex said, and then a thought occurred to her. "How are we going to collect the tears once they've been shed?" Connor shrugged. "Maybe we'll have to kidnap a fairy and keep her around until we need her to cry. What does a journal say to do?" Alex opened the journal and found the section about the Fairy Kingdom. "Acquiring a fairy tear is not an easy task." "Surprise, surprise," Connor said. "Since fairies are, for the most part, very happy beings, it will be hard to find one so overcome with grief that it is brought to tears. However you manage, hopefully under moral conditions, you can use a vial hidden inside this journal's spine to contain the tear." Alex turned the book on its side and looked closely, through the hole where the pages were connected to the spine. Deep inside the journal spine was a small glass vial with a cork stopper. "Look at this," Alex said, pulling the vial out of the spine. "It says to put the tear in this vial." "Great. Now all we need is an emotional fairy," Connor said. Alex stopped walking. "Do you hear that?" she said. Tiny sniffling sounds came from close by. The twins looked around but couldn't see where they were coming from. "What is that?" Connor asked. He looked down beside him and had to blink a few times to make sure he wasn't imagining what he saw. "No, this can't be real. This is too easy. Nothing has been this easy." "What are you talking about?" Alex asked him. Connor turned her shoulders to face what he was looking at. Sitting on a rock on the side of the path was a fairy. And she was crying. She was only a few inches tall and had big blue wings similar to a butterfly's. She had dark hair and a purple dress made of leaves and shoes made out of flower buds. Her tiny hands were clasped around her big eyes and tears were running down her face. The twins just stood there and stared at her. They were afraid their minds were playing tricks on them. They both wanted to see this so badly. "What are you looking at?" the fairy said to the twins in a tiny, high-pitched voice. "We're sorry," Alex said. "Why are you crying?" Connor jerked his head towards his sister, and she knew what he was thinking. "Who cares? Get some tears." "That's none of your business," the fairy said, and sobbed some more. "Forgive me," Alex said. "I can tell you're upset about something, and I wouldn't be myself if I didn't ask if there's anything I could do to help you." "Well, that's sweet. Thank you," the fairy said, changing her attitude. "I'm just having a very rough day, that's all." Connor kept trying to grab the vial from his sister's hand, but she wouldn't let him take it. "What's your name?" Alex asked the fairy. "Trix," the fairy said. "Hello, Trix. My name is Alex, and this is my brother Connor," Alex said. "Would you like to talk about what's troubling you?" Connor was shocked. She was actually more interested in helping this fairy than collecting the tears. "My trial is in a few minutes, and I'm scared," Trix said. "Your trial?" Connor said. "Did you kill somebody?" "Of course not," said Trix. "I used magic on another fairy, and now the fairy council may ban me from the fairy kingdom." "I'm sorry to hear that," Alex said. "What'd you do to the other fairy?" Connor asked. "I turned her wings into prune leaves," the fairy said, and cried some more. "It was only for a moment. I turned them back, but he was provoking me. He kept teasing me about my size." "They're going to ban you from the entire kingdom just for turning someone's wings into leaves for a couple seconds?" Connor asked. "Oh, they've been very strict ever since that enchantress put the curse on Sleeping Beauty," Trix said. "The Fairy Council believes that every fairy is representative of their order and should act as such." "Those are high expectations," Alex said. "I can't leave the fairy kingdom," Trix said. "It would be so lonely, and I hate being alone. I don't have many friends to begin with." Alex let Trix use the corner of her shirt to dry her tears. Connor turned bright red watching his sister dispose of the tears so carelessly. He had to make the fairy produce more. "Being banned wouldn't be really terrible, though, wouldn't it?" Connor said. "You'd probably have to live in an old bird nest in a dwarf forest and be chased by wolves and witches every day, and that's only if an ogre doesn't capture you in a jar and barbecue you first." Trix started crying hysterically at this. "Connor, what's wrong with you?" Alex yelled. Connor snatched the vial from her hand and collected a tear from Trix's face just as it dripped off her chin. Alex gave him a dirty look. "Would you like us to go with you to your trial?" asked Alex, leaning down to be eye level with Trix. "For emotional support." "I would like that," Trix said. "That's very kind of you." "Well, I know what it feels like to think the whole world is against you," Alex said. "We'd better be going. I don't want to be late." Trix flew into the air and fluttered down the path. Twins walked after her. "Alex, are you crazy?" Connor said. "We got the tear. Let's get out of here." "We're the only people in the world who this fairy has," Alex said. "We're going to be good people and help her out." Connor grunted with frustration. "Helping this fairy isn't going to take away the bad memories you have from school, Alex." Alex ignored him and followed Trix down the path. Connor followed, sulking the entire way. They traveled deeper into the fairy kingdom. Everything in the distance seemed to sparkle. They thought it was a mirage at first, but as they got closer, they saw that the trees, the grass, and the path all shined and shimmered in the sunlight. "What's up with all the glitter?" Connor asked. "Oh, I don't think that's glitter. I think it's magic," Alex said. They reached the heart of the kingdom and were completely bewildered by what they saw. It was like they were standing in a gigantic tropical garden with large, colorful flowers of all shapes and species. There were weeping willows over small ponds and vines that grew across the ground and up trees. There were beautiful bridges over many streams and ponds. and there were fairies everywhere. Many flew around in the air, some just hovered above the ground, and some walked on smaller paths adjacent to the one the twins were on. They were all different shapes and sizes and colors. Some were taller than Alex and Connor, and some were as small as Trix, and some didn't even seem to be solid, but rather made from pure light. There were just as many male fairies as there were female. Some of the fairies wore gowns, others' clothes were made entirely of plant materials, and some wore nothing at all. Many had made miniature homes in the branches of the trees or in mushrooms on the ground, and there were fairies who even lived underwater with colorful fish. Something about this place made Alex feel as if everything were right in the world. It gave her more hope, excitement, and happiness with every step she took. It was paradise. "Have you ever seen something so beautiful in your entire life?" Alex asked her brother. "Not too shabby," Connor said. "The Fairy Council operates in the Fairy Palace. It's just up ahead," Trix said, and gestured the twins to follow her over a pond. They, of course, took a bridge. They walked toward a palace made entirely out of golden arches and pillars. It was completely open. There were no more than 2 walls to line each room, and all the walls were tall with no glass. When you lived in a place as beautiful as this, who would want to keep out the environment? Trix took the twins to the center of the palace, into a long room with many seats facing the front. "This would be the perfect place for a wedding," Alex said. At the front of the room were 7 fairies, Alex and Connor's size. They looked like a living rainbow. Each was dressed in a specific color, and they stood behind podiums positioned over an arch. "That's the Fairy Council," Trix said. "That's Rosette the Red Fairy, Tangerina the Orange Fairy, Xanthus the Yellow Fairy, Emeralda the Green Fairy, she's mostly in charge, Skyline the Blue Fairy, Violetta the Purple Fairy, and Coral the Pink Fairy." Rosette was short and plump and had very rosy cheeks. Tangerina was stylish and wore her orange hair in a large beehive, with actual bees flying around it. Xanthos was male. He wore a shiny suit and parts of him were ablaze. Emeralda was tall and beautiful. She was black and wore a long emerald dress that matched her eyes and jewelry. Skyline was very pale and had the hair color of the sky and flowing robes the color of the sea. Violetta was the oldest and had grayish-purple hair. Coral was the youngest, no more than a few years older than the twins in appearance, and wore a simple pink dress that had a pair of wings on her back. There were 2 empty seats on either side of the podium. "Who sits there?" Alex asked Trix. "Oh, the Fairy Godmother sits on the left, and Mother Goose sits on the right," Trix said. "They complete the Fairy Council, although they're rarely here. They're always traveling around the kingdom helping people." "Is that you, Trix?" Emeralda asked. "Yes, I'm here." Trix peeped nervously and flew to the front of the podiums. "You're late. Please come forward," Emeralda said. She was gracious, but authoritative. Someone the twins would definitely want in their corner during an altercation. "Trix, do you know why you've been called before the Fairy Council?" Trix shamefully nodded her head. "Yes, ma'am." "Being a fairy requires a strong sense of responsibility," Tangerina said. "Responsibility you haven't shown." Trix nodded some more, her eyes welling with tears. "I know," she squeaked. "Unfortunately, we can't let your actions go unpunished," Violetta said. "We need to make an example of you, to reinforce the #1 rule of being a fairy," Rosette said. "To never, under any circumstance, use your magic harmfully against another person, place, or thing," Xanthos said. "Unfortunately, there's only one thing for us to do," Skyline said. "We have to banish you from the fairy kingdom," Coral said. Trix covered her eyes and wept harder than she had all day. "I understand," she said through her sobs. "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" Connor yelled from the back. "Hold on, are you kidding me?" He promptly walked to the front of the room and stood next to the spot where Trix was hovering. "Connor," Alex said and tried to grab him, but was too late. "Are you seriously going to ban her for making one little mistake?" Connor asked the council with his hands on his hips. There was whispering and murmuring among them. They were appalled that someone would so openly question their judgment. "Please don't try to help me," Trix whispered to Connor. "Young man, who do you think you are?" Xanthos said. "Well, I'm just a kid, but even I can tell that your ruling is ridiculous," Connor said. They all gasped, except for Emeralda, who kept her calm and imposing demeanor. Alex slapped an open palm against her forehead. "How dare you?" Tangerina said, and the bees swirling around her hair grew mad and flew faster. You are out of line, Violetta said. How disrespectful, Coral said. How rude, Skylene said. Emeralda was the only member of the assembly to remain silent. She studied Connor with her emerald eyes. Silence, Emeralda ordered. She raised a hand, and all of her fellow assembly fairies went quiet. Let the boy speak. I want to hear what he has to say. Go ahead, young man. Connor wasn't sure if this was a trick or not, but he didn't hold back. Listen, I'm not a fairy, thank God. And I'm not perfect either. I try to be the best person or the best student possible, but every once in a while, I slip up. I forget a homework assignment, fall asleep in class. My best effort isn't as good as someone else's might be, and no one should have the right to scold or punish me publicly, humiliating me for it, Connor said. Trix knew what the rules were, and she still committed an offense against one of her peers, Rosette said. I mean, no one can be perfect, Connor said, and from what I hear, the guy had it coming. Where's his trial? Why isn't he in here? Why do I always get detention for sleeping when it's ancient Mesopotamia that should be punished for being so boring? The council continued to be outraged by this outburst. Many members didn't want to tolerate it and tried to leave. I hear what the child is saying, Emeralda said. But we can't just pardon Trix. We're the Fairy Council. It wouldn't send a good message to the rest of the kingdoms, Tangerina said. Look, Orange Lady, Connor said, in the last week, my sister and I have been almost eaten by a witch, narrowly missed by it being attacked by a pack of wolves, were almost killed by a possessive bridge troll, survived a burning castle, and barely escaped a life of enslavement in the troll and goblin territory. If you ask me, you've got bigger problems than a fairy turning a jerk's wings into leaves. Looks to me like you busy yourselves with stupid little things so you feel like you're doing something, when in reality, you can't handle what's really going on out there. The council were silent, and all members appeared to become very concerned. Enslavement? Skylene asked. You mean the trolls and goblins are still kidnapping and enslaving people? Yes, Connor said. There were dozens of us down there. We really could have used your help, but I guess you're too busy slapping fairies' wrists for playing pranks on each other. Although they held their stoic expressions, the council was secretly ashamed of themselves. Connor was right. They eyed one another for a moment before Emeralda broke the silence. On behalf of this council, I hereby forgive Trix for her crimes, Emeralda said. Xanthus, Skylene, and Tangerina, I say we pay a visit to the Troll King and the Goblin King immediately. And furthermore, let this be a lesson to all of us. Xanthos, Skylene, and Tangerina nodded and then disappeared into thin air with a pop. Thank you, Mr. Emeralda said. Washington, Connor said. Connor Washington. Emeralda smiled and then disappeared with the others. Trix flew up to Connor's face and gave him a huge hug. That's the bravest and nicest thing anyone has ever done for me, Trix said. Connor looked back at his sister. She was beaming with pride. She was so proud of her brother. It was a look Connor never got to see. You know, helping a fairy isn't going to take away any unhappy memories from school, Connor told him when she joined Connor and Trix near the podiums. Connor slyly grinned. I had to say something. I would have regretted it if I hadn't. The remaining Fairy Council fairies began to leave. Some simply walked off and others disappeared into thin air, leaving behind sparks or bubbles as they went. Coral was searching the room for something and patting her lap as she went. Here, Fisher. Where are you? Fisher, Coral said. A fish with 4 legs ran past Alex and Connor and jumped up into Coral's arms. Oh, there you are, Coral said. It's just about time for your lunch. Alex and Connor looked at each other confused, each wondering if the other had just seen that too. Is that what I think it is? Connor asked. I think so, Alex said. Connor was just about to leave when the twins stopped her. Sorry, Coral was just about to leave when the twins stopped her. Excuse me, Alex said. Where did you get your fish? Oh, Fisher, Coral said. I dropped a wand in a lake once and granted him a wish after he swam down and got it for me. He wished for legs, silly thing, so he could play with some boy who lived in a village nearby. The boy ended up dying, sadly, so Fisher came to live with me. Coral's wings began to flap, and she flew away with her pet fish. So that was what we thought it was, Connor said. Yes, said Alex, her head spinning with questions. That was the walking fish from Dad's story. Well, interesting. Very well. Well, we will have to park it here for the time being, because that's the end of chapter 12. But when we come back for lucky number chapter 13, it will be time to hear about a wolf pact. However, that time is not right now because it has gotten late and I have gotten tired. So it's time for me to get some sleep. Good night.